Welcome. I have a special guest, me, on the podcast. Just kidding. Justice, we're here from ThriveWorks 360. We're super excited. Starting off with the kind of a podcast. And I
Yeah.
know, just as you said, I have a lot of questions in my mind. Really quickly, talking about ThriveWorks 360. What are your thoughts about kind of what we're aiming to do as we get started with some of this here with those that might tap in to say hi? And
I think that's where my mind at. And I think as we're starting something new, one of my thoughts went back to, well, maybe just being really open about what that is even and how that feels doing it. Cause my mind kept going back to like, oh, we want to start sharing a bit of the experience that we're creating and having. So what is it we're even doing and why are we trying to share this with people? Like, why would we want them to have this podcast? That's what maybe I would like to spend a few minutes talking about. Cause for me, I think it's really cool as we go in and we start seeing business being impacted and the experience of wherever you're at on your journey. And maybe a little later we could talk about who's ideally we'd be working with. But it's gonna feel like it's got a little getting started, has some friction, regardless of if you know what you're doing or not. And I think that's an interesting concept, though.
Let's kind of build out on that. I think you talk about, like, you can say it's imposter syndrome, but I think outside of that, it can be a lot on your mind if you're like, hey, we want to go help other people. We want to reach out. We want to connect. We want to help share some of the things that we've learned and hopefully to be able to kind of compress everybody else's time, kind of going from where they're at to where they want to go. What were some of the thoughts that came to your mind as you started thinking about that? Because I know your last week and a half have been a pretty interesting journey as you've started to decide, I really think that we can, I can go and impact a group.
Yeah.
I can reach out. I can impact individuals. I can impact those individuals who might be entrepreneurs or those groups that are larger.
Right.
But go ahead and kind of give me the first full question. What would that be? And then go ahead and share your thoughts and your answers with this.
On the impact of the bit, like where we start with impacting this,
your thoughts about kind of your first thing.
Like
if we're here with this group and they're seeing us and they're kind of going to connect with us for the first time.
Yeah.
What is one of the first messages? What's the first question you want to ask? So we can clearly kind of state that. And then what would you say and how do you want to answer that for them?
I think that's great. I think that's a hard one. And I only say hard because it's almost a little loaded because it's like, hey, what are you trying to do? And I think at the end of the day, one of it is like, okay, well, we're trying to impact revenue. And then it's like, okay, well, I have some methods, but where are you at in your journey? Right.
So let's go back to that.
Yeah.
So what are you trying to do? Let's just first answer that question, however you feel most comfortable. And then again, you might come up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. That's okay. But go ahead and kind of break those out for me. What are you trying to do? Yeah.
And that's where I was like, it gets a little loaded, right? Because what are you trying to do? And that can be in regards of overall strategies for your business, where you're heading with revenue, what your initiatives are. Maybe it's a cultural shift, a leadership shift, right? There's different things that you can help a business see and go through, because I like saying business is a bit of a universal language. And I think there's principles that can apply that can be helped across all that. So what is it we're coming in to really help with, and maybe you don't know yet. Maybe you just know you need some help because you're wanting to see a bottom line. And so we can walk through those things.
So coming back, and if I were to kind of clarify this a little bit more, I think you mentioned several things, but in general, I think if I were to try to recapture that is, you can walk in anybody's door,
right?
Regardless of it being a 1-man show, a 2-man show, a 10-man show, or a 100-person business. And there are probably several things that company potentially currently right now is considering.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. One, you say revenue. That's good. That's really big. Give me the first thing that you think of that breaks down how or what might they need to be considering if they're thinking revenue. And again, those that are listening, we're not going to be getting into the whole bit of driving bottom line growth. There's the whole EBITDA and other things that help add value, but just in general. And I say this for me because depending on the time of the year, something could be seasonal, depending on the quality of the content or what you're providing, if it's education or if it's hard goods, there might be price value. I think people can say, I'm not, or my industry might not be buying. So revenue, tell me a little bit more about walking in, or maybe what might you want to get from me as a business owner or somebody in charge of revenue? Like, what other thoughts come to your mind surrounding revenue?
Revenue as a whole and how we're generating it is where my mind initially goes. Not making, like you said, the budget cuts, but let's look at why we feel like there's a lack of revenue, right? Because if you're wanting to increase it,
could I say lack of revenue or how we increase revenue? Are those two kind of similar things for you?
Yeah, I think in my mind, it's like, oh, I want to be here, right? You're setting goals and you're short of those goals. Not that that's good or bad, because once we hit that goal, hopefully you've already got another goal in mind that you can connect to. So then really it comes back for me where I'll lean into is the marketing side of things. And to me, impacting the revenue is our message and plan for getting that out there, sharing what it is that we're doing. And do we have the right strategies in place to really put multipliers on your revenue with a few different processes, I would say, that we can talk about that you can implement into a team and really scale out from there.
So coming back, I like that. Again, one of the things you mentioned again is if it is revenue, it's how are we making that?
Right.
And how are we multiplying it? You said, really, let's look at the marketing piece. I know a lot of other individuals out there that do phenomenal jobs in teaching. They talk about some of those come from really a basic bit of, hey, lead generation.
Yeah.
Is your mind, does it go down to some of the specifics? Is it a little bit more broad in general? Because I know when I walk in, I kind of like, what is the business really trying to do?
Right.
What might be the base of customers that they already serve?
Yeah.
Because I could also say that some of your best revenue can come from your existing set of customers. I mean, so maybe expand on that a little bit more when you talked about marketing, and we can start to look at the channels that you can start to scale that revenue through the marketing arm.
Right. Yeah, no. So when I start looking at that, the thing is like you're saying, is how do we start shrinking that in to create these targeted areas that we're going to focus on and then put initiatives into, right? So as you're starting to look at what is marketing, and you mentioned lead gen, you mentioned maybe some of the other things that are impacting it. How's your website looking? What's the flow of your customer?
Oh, I like that.
The areas we go to are really what's the customer journey, right? Like looking at as a whole, where are we trying to head to? I notice I'm trying to lean over. Maybe I should.
You're good.
Just a little. Yeah. So looking at how the customer is going to flow is the first step, because we're going to identify any disconnects that we're seeing, right? Like maybe there's a point to where, oh, you're capturing customers and then you're not really making them lifetime value. You know, they have one buy and done. And so we can look at that process and then from there shrink in another level, right? Which is where you start getting a little bit more
granular kind of,
right? Granular, getting in with a team.
And I know I'm kind of coming into this, and I feel like as you're talking, you're covering several things. And so maybe if we were coming back to somebody who's kind of connecting with you and with me at this first point, one thing I love, kind of to recap that, is you just talked about the customer journey, and one of those things you talked about, hey, if you're an online or you have an online presence, I'm guessing that what you're saying then is when they land on the site, what's the message? And again, we haven't talked about trying to break that down, but if that's part of the journey, how and what do people think about when they see that? I think you also talked about if you have a customer, so you might retarget. And I think you could also say, if we're trying to retarget somebody, again, how and what might they be seeing regarding, again, and maybe you can expand on that a little bit more, or whatever you feel like you would want to share about continuously driving revenue through maybe this channel, just high level ideas. I like that, because I've looked at several sites, and I didn't know this about a year and a half ago. Customers, you just have to keep it simple. And if they land on a site and you're offering, I've seen several companies, they have different priced products at different values, right? Let's say it's a mid $10,000, $15,000 offering. They've got a 10, they've got a 5, they got something lower. I'm thinking again that what you're saying is there something that connects with whoever that $1,000 buyer is, which is probably going to be different. And it might be the company as a whole. Like, so maybe share a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And I think you kind of identified one of the things that like I enjoy doing in that process is going, all right, let's start diving. And then I was like, oh, actually, you just reminded me, like, let's take a step back. Because really what I'm trying to say is does everyone know their next action? Like we find like just in general business, question. Like, what am I doing? Like, right. Yeah. Well, let's start with the podcast, or like if a customer knows what they're doing, you've achieved. But that's a high level concept that I was like, oh, I actually skipped over that and just went straight to here's some things we're going to do so the customer knows that. But in general, if you just focus on that, you'll get a lot farther than if that's not conscious in your mind. So on one level is like, hey, what are we doing at all steps? That could be in your email marketing, that could be on your website and the purchasing process, but thinking in the customer's shoes, where am I at my journey and where am I next, right? And you're always just going, hey, here's the opportunity to connect to that.
And coming back, meaning do they have something that they know they can follow or click on or read, or tell me a little bit more, because I really like that, because really the goal is, again, and then say this again, is when a customer comes, if I was the customer, do I know
what I'm doing, right?
What I'm doing, like what's next for me?
What's next for me? And I think clarity and simplicity in that message is what you're striving for, right?
You have an example that pops in your mind? Because I feel like that's something that you definitely know and understand. I know that that's an important part. And I would tell you, man, I just go back. You can pull up 100 websites and probably 90 of them are not going to have a clear message about what the customer is doing, what the company is about. And if I'm a customer, where should I go? How do I find out some information? Because a lot of businesses are like, we're awesome. We're the biggest. We're the best. We have the best products.
Yeah, it's almost like making the business a hero is kind of, there's some people who talk about like, oh, how do we make the customer a hero? And I guess in that example, one of the things you want to talk about is when they get to the site, if like, I always think about, where did I come from as a customer? Because that's going to set me up for what I'm hoping to do, so I can feed them the next step.
Where I come from, like what got me to the site,
like, which comes back to your lead
what was my problem,
or was even the result.
My need.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so now I'm finding this this site, this, heck, it might be a paid ad, whatever it is, because I'm finding that I'm relating to this pain or something. And so now if I'm here and we've given them a pain, are we answering that, or are we just like, hey,
here's this information, and then you don't give them the opportunity? Actually, I had a disconnect with someone recently because I was like, oh, let me re-clarify that, because they're like, oh, are you saying you just want to give them this information? And we're talking about emails. And it was like, oh, I really want this message to be clear in the email. And I kind of almost over exaggerated. And I was like, oh, I really want this so clear that that's almost the only thing in the email. And they're like, oh, well, if they're really excited, do you not want them to go somewhere else? I'm like, well, no, that's not what I meant, because you always want them to know foremost what's the most important thing I'm getting, and then where can I go to expand on that. So like I kind of skipped over that concept, but and maybe that in of itself, recapping that, was like, oh, that's a little hazy. What do you mean, Justice? It's really, hey, here's why I'm here, right? Whether it's you're coming because of this great product. One, I want to make sure I'm aligning with, oh, I see exactly how that is a great product. Now I want to know more, or I want to go buy the thing. Give me the opportunity to do that. And, but what I first did was clearly told you, you're in the right spot and this is what you need to do next, right? Like, hey, this is an amazing product. Here's where you can go. And it's simple.
Yeah. And I think that you're talking about, there's a lot more depth to that, but I've heard things just super simple. You have an ad, it's an image ad. They click on something, the image is slightly different, and you're like, oh, am I on the right place? So even just connects when I'm here. And then if you've spoken to a pain point or a desire or something that you're going to help me solve, and I land, and let's say I've got some major problems with my arm and it's my elbow, and then we get there and we're like, hey, knee joints, this helps. You're like, what the world? Like, I was talking about elbows and elbowitis. No, I don't know what you call it. Elbow problems. When we start talking about toes and digits and phalanges, you're just like, whoa, this probably is not for me. And I don't know if I'm going to go down the page.
And keeping it consistent. And I guess where I bring in that call to action is, all right, well, now I've created consistency. So there's clarity on, here I am. Now, what do I do with that? Oh, here, buy this product. Or actually, before I can even sell you on this, I need you to learn this other thing. And really, that's where you start getting too nitty gritty. Do I just provide that lower down? If it came from an email, that's where we go back to, hey, what's the life cycle? What's the process? Are they, because the different medias, and they're really funnels. I'm sure there's just, funnels are talked about everywhere, but in general, it's building out those right funnels. And so that's a higher level concept that if we start talking about,
it starts getting more detail. So again, if we were to back up, and I'm going to say this because where you're going is if we're going to talk to somebody about something, they find whatever they're doing, understanding that those that are out that are looking at increasing revenue, whether again, you're an entrepreneur, whether you're in the business of marketing directly or creating funnels or helping connect and sell goods at the end of the day. I think what you're saying is when somebody lands, keep it simple, make sure you're relating to whatever that challenge, the problem, the thing was that drove them there. If they're there, and this is where you're kind of going is sometimes just in general business, sometimes you want to say hi. You don't need to say, I'm looking at having you buy something. There are some nurturing components. Now in there down at the bottom, you might give them again where they can go next, but let's make sure that whatever they're coming for, we start to clarify it. Now there's also, again, details like, hey, I might want to create what they call an open loop. They might, you might create interest that causes them again to go down. depending on how they're finding this. Again, if
Right.
it's something you reach out to on an email, first you want to get them to open
Mm.
with the subject line. Now that I'm in there, am I relating the subject line to a few things,
Yeah.
causing a desire now for me either to partially answer that and then get them to go somewhere else, or
Yeah.
get them to go down the page? And I know in several businesses that I've seen and I've worked with, we might even do something without a call to action. I think there's always a good
Yeah.
piece. But again, getting somebody some information, then deciding how far we want to continue or how long we want to spend with them now that they have found us, right?
Right.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to kind of wrap this one up, and we'll come back to you with another session coming shortly. Stay tuned
Cool.
and join ThriveWorks 360. Son of a gun. Okay.